One, two, three, four, five.
All right, welcome to the people who are trickling in right now. Happy Friday, as I say or have said pretty much every Friday for the last 15 weeks. At this time, the Zoom webinar door is apparently a single file door, so people are kind of trickling in one by one. We will get started in a minute or two, and then we will jump right into the panel. All right, it seems people are still coming in. I know it's a Friday afternoon at 3:30, so I imagine actually most weeks we have people come in over the next few minutes, but people didn't come to hear me. They came to hear the panel. So I'm going to start with welcomes and opening, and then we'll get rolling. So hello, welcome to the Smart Equitable Commonwealth, co-creating the society we want. My name is Dan O'Brien. I'm the director of the Boston Area Research Initiative. And this is the closing keynote of our annual conference, which began back on April 24th. It was originally intended to occur on April 24th, but so here we are, and really excited that we've come this far. Now, I have a ton to say about that, both substantively and probably sentimentally, but I'm going to save that to the back end because we have a fantastic panel today. Speaking about what cities and towns need now, and we have a series of prominent municipal leaders to answer that question. And so I'm going to save my remarks for later on. I'm just going to start with a couple of really quick announcements and reminders. The podcasts for the first 13 panels are now available through Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. This is also where you will find all future podcasts, but that's just today's, released each Friday. So yeah, so they're there if you ever want to go back and relive any panel you really enjoyed or a panel that you didn't get a chance to see. Run of show for today. I'm going to open quickly here and pass it to our moderator and the expert panelists for a robust conversation. And that conversation will end as close to 4:30, as I know at least one of our speakers has a hard stop at that time. And I will then follow with some closing remarks for the conference. It's a little funny. It's the first conference I've ever hosted where my closing remarks are not to a captive audience. You all can log off, but I hope some of you will join me for some reflections on where we go in the next year. And then we're going to have a closing reception. We've renamed the Bari Happy Hour, and that will be at 4:45. And that link is bit.ly. Apologies. bit.ly/Bari, capital B-A-R-I, happy, and the password is Bari, capital B-A-R-I. And that will be posted in the Q&A. So with that, we have completed 13 panels to date, covering a range of different topics, pretty much every angle of public policy you can touch, and really learning about the great work that has been done by Greater Boston Civic Data Ecosystem over the last year. but also then having to do a lot of mental acrobatics to apply this to the new and daunting world we currently inhabit, right? One filled with references to, quote, a new normal, to building back better, and also a continued need and focus for transformations that address persistent and pervasive racial and economic inequities in our society. Now, today, we're going to have a conversation that flips this narrative around. Instead of presenting past work and pivoting it, we're going to ask a series of experts how we should pivot our efforts as researchers, policymakers, practitioners, advocates, funders, and community members. The experts in question are three mayors, a town manager, and the director of our regional planning council, which supports 101 municipalities. And they will provide us with a unique set of insights into what cities and towns need now, and how this community, right, the Bari community and everyone associated with research policy in the region can help to address these needs moving forward. So with that, I want to turn it over to our moderator, Sid Espinosa. He is uniquely positioned to lead this conversation. He is the Director of Philanthropy and Civic Engagement at Microsoft, where he and his team work with cities across the US to provide vital exposure to technology for those who need it most. He's worked repeatedly in a number of different positions at the intersection of technology and policy in roles in the Clinton administration, at Hewlett Packard, and he served 2 terms as mayor of Palo Alto. So he is, again, uniquely positioned and distinctively able to speak to both sides of this conversation. He has the needs of cities, of towns on the one side of his expertise, and the potential of research and technology to help on the others. Now, as just a last quick thought, I want to remind the speakers, they already know this, but I want to say it one more time. Keep in mind that you do have a captive audience right now that really wants to help. So please be candid and direct with us. Give us a call to action and tell us how we can bring data, tech, and research to support your municipality and your peers. So before I turn it over, just want to remind everyone, we are monitoring the Q&A, and we also have at Bari Boston and hashtag Bari 2020 on Twitter, and we will pass all your questions along to Sid. With that, Sid, please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dan, for that intro. And thank you for your leadership and this incredible series of conversations. If anyone on this call hasn't had a chance to watch the previous sessions, I encourage you to check out those recordings to learn from experts and practitioners about regional issues, from transportation to equity in schools. The census one was particularly interesting, pollution. These have been really enlightening sessions, and kudos to Bari's conference committee for pivoting during these challenging times and finding a way to deliver this important annual conference. Today, we're in for a real treat. We will spend the next hour talking about what cities and towns need now, and we have this incredible panel of regional leaders to learn from. Let's start by acknowledging that these are unprecedented times. The global pandemic has, of course, changed all of our lives in small and in massive ways. The incredible impact on schools, businesses, hospitals, the economy, et cetera. We've heard about these challenges. But imagine running a city during these times. Imagine running a city from home. Imagine being in a role where you're holding together an ecosystem where citizens are relying on you for essential services, where your population wants you to come up with solutions to life and death problems that are out of your control. Imagine holding a community together through a devastating public health crisis, national turmoil about racism and racial inequities, through skyrocketing unemployment, through a worsening recession. What's it really been like to be mayor for these past 5 months? How have cities changed in this region during COVID, and where are we headed now? And with so many data scientists, government employees, community leaders, researchers, academics in this audience today, we'll also talk about the changing role of data and technology in cities at this time. Data is obviously at the foundation of Bari's work and Microsoft's business. And we'll talk about a call to action for everybody wanting to get involved. How can you today think about your role in this ever-changing environment? Here's the agenda that we're gonna do. I'll quickly introduce each panelist. We'll invite them to give 2 minutes of sort of opening comments and context setting for their community. There's a few prepared questions, and then we really wanna open it up to the audience. So please submit those questions into the Q&A. Give me just a couple seconds here, and I'm going to quickly run through in alphabetical order an introduction of our esteemed guests. Steve Bartha, Town Manager, Danvers since 2014, previously the Assistant Town Manager in Avon, Connecticut for 5 years. He's only the 5th Town Manager since this position was created in 1949. He serves as the community's Chief Executive and Fiscal Officer and oversees the municipally owned electric department. He also serves on the board of directors for the Massachusetts Municipal Association and is an executive officer for the Massachusetts Municipal Management Association. I knew that was going to get me. And a fun fact, he taught for 2 years high school English in Baton Rouge as part of Teach for America. Mark Drayson serves as the executive director for the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. He's done that since 2002. He leads the agency staff in their work to provide technical and professional services that improve physical, social, economic health for the people who live and work in the Metro Boston region. The organization covers a wide range of areas related to smart growth and regional collaboration, including transportation, land use, water resources, clean energy, public safety, public health, housing, economic development, and collective procurement. Prior to joining the organization, Mr. Drayson served as the president and CEO of the Massachusetts Association of Community Development Corporations. He also served, as I think many of you know, 2 terms as a state representative from Boston and Brookline from 1991 to 95. Mayor Rivera, a Lawrence kid. I love that in your bio. Mayor Rivera has served our country in the Army. He became a military police officer stationed in Germany. After his tour overseas, he returned home and worked his way through college on a GI Bill at UMass Amherst, completing his undergraduate degree in only 3 years. You don't hear that these days. One of Dan's highest honors was becoming the manager of the Stadium, Courts, and Market Street housing projects at the Lawrence Housing Authority, where he grew up. While at the Housing Authority, Dan went to school nights and weekends and received an MBA from Suffolk University. In 2012, he ran for mayor on a platform of change for the city, became the 59th mayor of the city of Lawrence, and after 4 years of progress was reelected in 2017. Thank you for being here. Thank you everybody for being here. Mayor Yvonne Spicer, there is also Dr. Spicer, is the first mayor of the city of Framingham and was sworn into office January 1st, 2018, the same day that Framingham officially became a city. 32-year Framingham resident and longtime educator, Mayor Spicer was previously the vice president for advocacy and educational partnerships at Boston's Museum of Science. Appointed to the Governor's STEM Advisory Council in 2012 by Governor Patrick, as the co-chair of the council's Teacher Development Committee. She was reappointed in 2017 by Governor Baker and served on the Computer Science and Engineering and Career Pathways Committees. Mayor Spicer was instrumental in establishing the 2001 Massachusetts Technology Engineering Curriculum Framework and the first ever K-12 grade assessment for technology and engineering. She also served as advisor and content expert to the National Governors Association. Committed to sustainable economic growth, the mayor served on the Massachusetts Business Roundtable, the Massachusetts Office of Treasurer Economic Development Trust Fund, and was a town meeting member and served on the Standing Committee for Ways and Means. Finally, Mayor Walsh, thank you so much for joining us, a lifelong champion of working for people in the city and the region of Boston, a product of the city of Boston, the 54th mayor. In 2018, Mayor Walsh was sworn in to serve a second term. Since taking office, Mayor Walsh focused on strengthening Boston's public schools, promoting global innovation and economy by attracting industry-leading private sector employers. Housing, crime prevention, police community relations have also been top priorities. He's also had huge wins, as I think people know, related to upgrading the city's digital infrastructure and using technology to transform government services, from parking meter payment apps to the new city website. He's also invited the people of Boston to help build a blueprint for the city's future and Imagine Boston 2030, the first citywide plan in half a century. Before taking office, Mayor Walsh served, of course, in the Massachusetts House of Representatives, where he was a leader on job creation, worker protections, substance abuse, mental health, homelessness, K-12 education, and civil rights. He played a key role in defending Massachusetts' pioneering stand on marriage equality. Their bios are much longer. You can find them online. There were so many other things to mention. Thank you for giving me a few minutes to run through those. Now let's get to hearing from them. We'll start by opening it up and having each person, before we talk about everything that's happening in the city and how cities have changed, give us some context, information about your city, region that you're representing, some of the policy issues that are top priority for you, even pre-COVID, or personal. Why did you run for office? What accomplishments are you proud of? We're trying to get a sense of that color of where you're coming from. And we'll go down the list again and start with you, Steve Bartha, Town Manager in Danvers.
Okay, I think I have unmuted myself and I'm recording this as directed by the great staff at Barry. So thank you, Sid, for that kind introduction. And thank you, Dan, for the invitation to join these distinguished panelists. Town managers generally like to fly under the radar, so it is good once in a while to be coaxed out of our comfort zone on occasions like this. By the numbers, Danvers is a community of 27,000 people spread across 13 square miles, located just about 15 miles north of Boston. There is ocean access through the Salem Harbor. We're served by 5 major highways. We have a strong local economy underpinned by medical manufacturing, retail, and automotive. And Danvers it's still a working class town despite recent upticks in wealth and education metrics. We have relatively low taxes for our region. And in surveys, we have residents who express higher than average satisfaction with the services they're getting. And I think importantly, a higher than average trust in local government than what you see in a lot of parts of the country. We have an operating budget across schools, library, utilities, just over $160 million. We have 300 employees on the town side, around another 400 on the school side. We have elected officials who support the work we do. They expect recommendations to be sound and implementable by the time they receive them. We in turn work very hard to maintain their confidence and deliver solid policy recommendations, focusing on short-term and long-term needs and opportunities. One of the recent accomplishments that I think the whole community here is proud of, our credit rating last year was upgraded to AAA. That had been a goal that the community had pursued for a long time. And it really affirmed years of disciplined financial management by officials and staff. And more importantly, it saved the town close to $500,000 when we issued the first round of debt for a new elementary school that we're building. So managers don't run for office, but just quickly, Sid mentioned I spent some time in Louisiana. I actually was there with Teach for America the year before and after Hurricane Katrina. And that was sort of my call to service. I remember clearly being both terrified and exhilarated by the idea of working for a town or a city in the aftermath of something like that. And it launched me to pursue an MPA and with the goal of doing what I do now. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to join you guys today.
Excellent. Thank you for being here. Mayor Rivera, tell us about Lawrence.
Lawrence is a small city north of Boston. We're about 6.7 square miles, about 90,000 people. We're an immigrant city. We've always been an immigrant city. I always tell people Lawrence is a place with an accent. We've always had an accent. And today just happens to be kids and families from the Dominican Republic and Guatemala. Back in the turn of the century was Irish kids and Polish kids and Italian kids. And so we're really the place where people come into American society and get a foothold and send their kids to school and really try to advance along for the American dream, buy their first home and send their kids to college. It's the workforce for the Merrimack Valley. So if you own a business between Newburyport and Lowell, from Somerville, New Hampshire, all the way to the other side of Boston, people from Lawrence work in your businesses. And it doesn't matter how high tech or low skilled, people from Lawrence work in your businesses. So we really are a workforce for the region. We're not a very young community. Our budget's about $380 million. Our school system, we have 15,300 kids in our schools. We do have the displeasure of having been taken over by the state. but it means we've been very flexible and dynamic in changing the way we do public education. And so our public schools have been doing really good in the last couple of years. A lot of more kids are graduating from high school and less kids are dropping out. We're doing better on MCAS, and we're spending a lot more money on infrastructure around the schools to make sure that the schools are really the palaces they should be in public education. I was in business before I came to run for office, and mostly because the way people perceived our community. And if you Googled Lawrence back in the day, you would come up with a series of really negative articles about the state of the city. We just had enough of it. And so we decided to run a campaign to change our city. And we won by the slight margin of 81 votes. There's probably more people on the Zoom watching this now than voted that I won by. And so we didn't take that for granted, and we went to the strong, said we're gonna support everyone and work for everyone. But our city is a resilient city, and we've tried to change the way people think about it. And so we try to build a lot of goodwill, and we've been pretty successful. I think in changing the way people perceive our city. We have gotten our finances in order. Our schools are getting squared away. Property values are up. And even during this COVID-19 problem, real estate has really stayed steady and businesses have been resilient. But we're all going through this together. I think that's all of it I'd like to share right now, but that's Lawrence.
Great. Mayor Spicer.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. To give you a little perspective of Framingham, we are one of the probably the newest city in the Commonwealth and probably across the country, because we just became a city 2.5 years ago, and I was fortunate enough to be elected to be the first mayor of this city, winning 59% of the vote. We are a city of about 70,000 people, and Framingham is quite diverse. About 30% of the population are people of color, and that demographic has been steadily rising. One of the largest population within our community is a Brazilian community, and they're roughly about 15% of the population. The African American community is quite small, about 5 to 6%, and Framingham, if you look at our history, we date back to 1700 when we were a town. However, looking at us becoming a city, this was an ongoing discussion that started back in the 1990s, and we finally voted to become a city in 2017, and by winning a small margin, 112 votes, to become a city. And I made the decision to throw my hat in the arena to run for this seat, largely because of what I had experienced in Framingham. I came here as a 23-year-old first-year teacher to work in the Framingham Public Schools, and I taught middle school and high school, and subsequently went on to do a bunch of other great things. And prior to becoming mayor, I served as the vice president of advocacy and partnerships at the Museum of Science, leading STEM programs around the world: science, technology, engineering, and math. And my background is technology and engineering. So, very analytical thinking. And also I use my skills as an engineer and an educator in this job every single day. So when I think about the things that I wanted to bring to Framingham, I wanted to, first of all, bring my breadth of experience, understanding business and industry, understanding working with policymakers, creating policy, and also seeing a vision for innovative ideas for jobs, the workforce. So that's the other part of, me looking at this job and seeing the potential for Framingham. We're centrally located. We're 20 miles directly west of Boston. We are the hub of Metro West. We employ a number of people in the surrounding communities. A very diversified workforce. We have life sciences, retail, manufacturing, and our life science industry is growing by leaps and bounds. So that is the other thing too, is that I bring those experiences to this position, and really kind of thinking about, the things in this 2.5 years of building a new city. Who gets to do that? And I'm pretty proud of where we are one of the things I'm very proud of is that I have settled 2 police contracts. And as a result of that, my police department is coming out of civil service, and hopefully the legislators will vote on that this coming week. And, but I more importantly, I have built a leadership team in Framingham that is trusting of me as their leader. They are also seeing that I will work very hard to support them. And that has been one of the foundations of building anything, is developing and cultivating trust in the people around you. And that's something I'm extremely proud of. And I'll talk more about our accomplishments in a little while.
Thank you. Mayor Walsh, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I know how busy your schedule is. Giving us that perspective of even pre-COVID, how you were thinking about the issues in Boston is welcome. Thank you. You are on mute, sir.
I should know by now to turn off the mute, but unfortunately we don't. 5 months later, we're still doing the same thing. First of all, thank you for having me today, and my colleagues here. They're great mayors and town managers, and Mark does a great job as well. So I want to thank everybody. Just real quickly about Boston, we are 700,000 people. 28% of our residents are foreign born, are immigrants. We have 50% of our people are people of color. 52% of the households in our city, the leader of that household is a woman. Something that's really important. So we're a diverse community. We're 47 square miles. Our top priorities, issues pre-COVID, and really still are, housing is a big issue in Boston. We came up with a housing plan to create 69,000 units of new housing by the year 2030. We were on pace to meet that, and COVID has slowed that down a bit, but we're still moving forward and focus on that. We have the climate action plans, climate ready Boston Harbor plans, resiliency plans, carbon reduction plans. And, one of the things I'm proud of, we are a leader in the country when it comes to climate resiliency. We have a lot more work to do. Saying we're a leader in the country can make us feel good in Boston, but certainly as a country, we fall way behind other countries in the world. So we have some work to do in that space. On education, we've just made a $100 million investment over the next 3 years in brand new priorities in our districts. As Danny Rivera mentioned, the challenges of urban districts are complicated for a whole host of reasons. We have a fairly new superintendent of schools, Brenda Casilius, who launched a new plan. And then when COVID came, we had to basically abandon everything we've done the way we're doing it because everything went online. And we're working to move forward on that as well as we get here in the front. Post-COVID, I know we'll get into that in a little bit, but really working on police relations and community relations, and also looking at our police department. We have a cadet program in the City of Boston Police Department, and our last class of graduates, 108 graduates, we had 22% of our cadets, of our police officers were officers of color, actually Black, 17% Latino, 8% Asian, I think 50% women roughly. So we are working on diversifying our police department. I ran for office in 1996. I ran for state representative. Why did I run? I think I ran because I wanted to be involved. I was involved in my community. And when I ran for office, when I was running for office as a state rep candidate, when I got elected to office, it were two very different things. And I found out what I was able to do as a legislator is to be able to fight for marriage equality, fight for programs around substance abuse and mental health issues, and really get involved in a lot of progressive issues that I care about. I think, quite honestly, in these times, it's very difficult. Sid, you talked about in the very beginning about opening this. We are facing right now as cities and towns, not just here in Massachusetts, but in America, we're still in the midst of a pandemic, very much in the midst of it. We are dealing with racial tension and racial unrest in our country, and we're headed potentially towards an economic recession, potentially worse than the Great Depression. So it's a really challenging time to be in office, but it's also it's a blessed time to be in office because we get to deal with the issues and tackle the issues that are right in front of us that are on top of mind for a lot of people. So I look forward to getting into conversation. There's probably more I could say, but I want to thank you and thank all the participants who are listening today for being involved in this important conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We will definitely come back to those issues. Mark Drayson, let's hear from you from a regional perspective, thinking about sort of the work that you do, the priorities pre-COVID, and how does your organization work across the region? Sir, you're on mute as well.
Thank you, Sid. Sorry about that. I'm going to try and be brief because I know folks are lining up with questions. I have the honor and pleasure of running the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, the regional planning agency for Greater Boston. We work on a number of issues: smart growth, regional collaboration, and equity throughout our region. We serve 101 cities and towns, basically from Cape Ann out to Framingham in the west and down to the town of Duxbury in the south. There are a few communities, such as Boston, Cambridge, a few others that have large, extraordinarily capable staffs. And then there are others that have small, extraordinarily capable staffs. And we try and fill in particularly for those, because issues may arise in regard to land use, in regard to the environment, in regard to public health, in regard to clean energy, that the individual city or town may not have the staff to deal with. And so we try and provide some of that expertise to them. We are supporters of smart growth. What is smart growth? We believe that the easiest way to define it is to say that most of your growth and most of your new infrastructure should come in places where people and infrastructure already exist. Try and save some of the areas that are beautiful natural areas, and try and encourage people to live closer to one another and to commute more by transit and to work closer to one another and to have more urbanized environment, even in the suburbs. There's a way to grow smart in the city. There's a way to grow smart in the suburbs. There's even a way to grow smart in rural areas. They just aren't all exactly the same. During the COVID crisis, I have seen really an unprecedented level of collaboration and sharing among the cities and towns in the region. Isn't always the case. Maybe it won't last forever. I'm hoping it will. But I think we've really seen the best out of our local leaders over the course of the last 4 months. And this goes all the way from, a huge city like Boston to a tiny town like Bolton. Everybody has been meeting together. Everybody has been talking and sharing together. Everybody's been trying to speak with one voice to the administration, both on Beacon Hill, the Baker administration, the legislature, also to the federal government, and trying to deal with the issues one at a time as they come up. Testing and tracing, still an enormous issue. The question of opening schools, an enormous issue about the best way to do it for our kids, our parents, and our teachers. The question of what's going to happen with public transit, which is so incredibly important to our region, but a lot of people don't want to travel on public transit right now. An enormous issue that we're trying to deal with. And as Mayor Walsh says, it is also a blessing to work here during these times, because you get to deal with some of the very most important issues that our region could possibly face. You get to deal with these issues, with partners. And historically that these are the times that make for change. This is when change happens, when everything's kind of hunky-dory and things are going like usual. Well, most people just kind of say, okay, let's put one foot in front of the other. We don't need to make big changes. For years, we were trying to get more people to work at home so they wouldn't burn as much fossil fuels going back and forth from work. Now, all of a sudden, it looks like that might change, and more people might stay working from home even when we have a vaccine and COVID is over. So enormously challenging issues, but invigorating as well. And I feel blessed to work on them every day with these great folks in our cities and towns.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. Let's go back the other way and start with you, Mayor Walsh. We're hoping to get a sense, all the people that have joined us today in the audience, of what's the last 5 months really been like? How has the work of your city changed, either because of COVID, the racial equity turmoil, global recession? What surprised you most? What's keeping you up at night now? Just give us a sense of kind of like what's life as a mayor like going through what the world is going through right now.
Yeah, thank you. Let me, February 6th, I think it was the first case of COVID-19 in Massachusetts and Boston. March 6th, we had about 6 cases. March 10th, we were all of a sudden looking at shutting everything down. The pandemic was sudden. We've been strengthened by it in our response, but we had to look at our shelter system, our healthcare system, our food access system, our social safety nets. We had our budgeting. As Steve mentioned, we've been blessed in the city to have 6 consecutive years of AAA bond rating. So our budget was preparing us for this, even though we didn't know what we were preparing for. a public health emergency was called. We shut schools down, switched to remote learning. We distributed 30,000 Chromebooks. We've served over 2 million meals to our students and families in the city since March. We added hundreds of beds across the city of Boston to help densify, reduce density, I should say, in our shelter system and treat homeless individuals impacted by COVID-19. About a third of our homeless population end up coming down with COVID, and 12 homeless people died. So when you think about the numbers, our system was able to help people stay alive. We had to protect housing security. We created renter relief funds. We put in place an eviction moratorium. The state followed suit with that, something that was really important. For our small businesses, they all had to shut down. We put together a relief fund, and we set up takeout options. And now as we look to the recovery, we have outdoor dining and a lot more outdoor dining. We had to set up test sites across the city, areas that were most hard hit by the virus. We had 20 test sites across the city. We have mobile testing, and we created a health and equities task force because right in the beginning, the infection rate for Black African American was 44%, white was 24%, Latino was 17%, and Asian, I think, was 7%. And we saw a huge inequity there, and we created a task force to be able to work to bring those numbers down. As we think about gradual reopening, we've worked using data as one of our primary sources. And in some cases, we've gone further than the state's recommendation for reopening due to Boston's specific challenges. The thing that's really complicated here is that we are seeing a lack of leadership in Washington, and Boston needs to show a better way forward. Our city, we're staying strong, we're keeping our priorities in order. And then on top of that, on top of COVID, about 10 weeks ago, George Floyd got killed. He was killed in Minneapolis, and we had no idea what the implications of that were. There were some small protests in Minneapolis, and then those protests took off across the country. And they're here in Boston, and they were here in Boston. And it's important for us as we think about moving forward that we hear, not just listen, but hear what people are talking about. People are looking for a different way. People are frustrated with the lack of progress, particularly with the Black community, and where the Black community has not gotten opportunities and options. And Yvonne can talk a lot more articulate about this because we're on calls, and Yvonne's helped me as well. And Danny, we have a mayor's meeting that we talk every now and then about what we're dealing with. But I'm hopeful for the future in Boston, but I'm also cautious about the future in Boston. We cannot go back to the old normal. We need to find a new and better normal moving forward. And when I say that, it's not just about health inequities and everything else. It's also about, we owe the generation, the younger generation, we owe them as much work as possible we can do on racial equity in all aspects of society, quite honestly, not just government, society. So I am hopeful for the future here. I think the pandemic has certainly put a pause on a lot of things for a lot of us, maybe to reflect a little bit about how do we move forward. I think if the pandemic didn't happen, and George Floyd, his murder didn't happen, we're kind of chugging along and we're measuring things in a different manner. I think as we get out of this, we're going to be looking at society through a whole different lens.
Mayor Spicer, you are on mute, ma'am.
I was taking a breather just listening to Mayor Walsh, like, wow, it's just like deja vu, and it becomes flooding back in to think about, what were those early days like? And I distinctly remember attending a meeting in Somerville with, experts in infectious diseases and listening to them recap all that was happening in Italy. And what are some of the predictions that potentially could happen in the United States of America? And that was on March 10th. I left that meeting just flabbergasted with my director of public health. And we both heard the same thing loud and clear. And the best way to stop the spread of this virus is to look at places where people congregate the most. And the first thing is schools. So that was the first order of business, is to close schools, our senior centers, our libraries, or places where we knew people came together. I declared a state of emergency in the city of Framingham, and the process went from there to looking, first of all, mobilizing ourselves to get the things we need within the city of Framingham. And I focused on making sure people had a roof over their head, food on the table, and they had a way in which to keep their families together. Also, how are we doing with testing? How are we doing to ensure that the spread of the virus, standing up operations for food security, rental assistance programs, and subsequently for businesses, loan programs for them. But also I looked at the way the teams of people that work in the city of Framingham redeployed themselves in ways that were so helpful. For example, our library team, the libraries were closed, so the library staff took to calling in conjunction with our senior center staff, calling all of our seniors and checking in on them personally to see if they're okay. Did they need resources? And so that was, an outreach program, whether it's creating face coverings for seniors, people just have been mobilizing. And to do this work, I have met daily, and I mean daily, with my leadership team. Looking at our data, looking at our numbers, because once again, data does inform actions on where we need to go. And up until this week, our numbers were going down steadily, maybe one new case, happening. And just this week, we're starting to see a climb in double-digit cases of infection, and which is causing me great concern because we have locked down this city from closing parks and to me doing something very drastic, taking down all basketball hoops and nets and so forth, just to avoid temptation, emphasizing social distancing, hand washing. It is every day, it is a learning experience. And as we all are now grappling with is that what will we do about school? And our superintendents are trying to sort out 3 different formulas to open schools, but also looking at the data and where do we need to go. I'd like to say during these 5 months, I've learned a lot about me as a leader, and I've also allowed people to step up and lead their divisions and do things out of the box that, they may have not had an opportunity. I can also say this time has taught us a sense of gratitude for the small things that we get to experience. And, the George Floyd killing, it was horrific, not only for cities around the country, but I think we all were traumatized by watching this and really looking at what do we need to do to answer. And we're still answering because, there were marches and protests, but there's still the need to, what do we do now? How do we keep moving this? And, and as Mayor Walsh so eloquently stated, it's listening, it's committing to some action, and rectifying institutional racism. And we have to name it, we have to call it, and we have to fix it. And as leaders, we have an opportunity to do something that has been missing. And that is to get in some good trouble and keep fighting that fight in a way that makes sense for our leadership. And some, and of course, all of us have gone through this period of like making decisions and wanting to make sure we're making the good decision, the right decision. And that's part of us talking to each other as mayors and town managers. We confer with each other on a regular basis. So having that relationship has been a godsend. And I think all of my colleagues can agree that it has really just to have somebody to bounce ideas off. And if I can step back and look at where we are now, I feel pretty good where we are in the city of Framingham, but I'm cautious. I'm optimistic, and I'm cautious about where we need to go.
Thank you. Mayor Rivera, same question, but let's shift a little bit more thinking about the future. Really the topic of the panel being what cities and towns need now. Let's talk about this. Obviously, cities are a complex ecosystem, small businesses, nonprofits, government agencies, educational institutions. All of these things have come up as we think about how we provide services for citizens. A lot of people joining the call today are trying to think about where are cities going? How might they engage differently in cities? What's needed there when you think about Lawrence, or where is it going? What's the next phase in, as Mayor Spicer just mentioned, with numbers spiking, you know, we should not be talking about this being over. Obviously, it's still something that we are very much in the middle of. But as we start to look ahead, tell us about Lawrence.
Well, I gotta tell you, I mean, for us, we had just settled down from a citywide, crisis before in the Columbia gas crisis, and literally 8 months prior to this thing happening, we had just kind of put to bed some of these big issues around the Columbia gas crisis, where 3 communities had been overpressurized, and so we had stood up all this mechanism, all this support system to get in and support people. And thankfully, we had, if that's a silver lining, we had this muscle memory where we just stood all that stuff back up. And so, it was clear to us the things that were important because it had been important to us before. Food and water to people, making sure you touch base with folks, checking in on the businesses, all these things that we had learned in the previous crisis became very clear to us. We just kind of stood all that stuff back up. And we didn't even have a Health and Human Services department before. And because we went through this process, we actually did one in the budget, and she went right to work with this new crisis. But because this crisis has shown, and not just this crisis, the murder of George Floyd, along with this crisis, has shown a huge flashlight on the inequities, the importance of housing, the importance of food. I think people took those things for granted, and so you had to stay in your house and not go anywhere else, and then you had to go shopping. All these things became, and then the importance of the people that were doing that work. For Lawrence, the coronavirus has been a perfect storm. Either you lost your job because the place you work shut down, or you lost your job because you couldn't find daycare, or you lost your job, for myriad other reasons, or you had to go to work in the middle of this thing because they were part of the essential workers. And when you have as big of a diverse community as we do, everybody was working. And so we do have a bunch of people from the gig economy, some of the small businesses that went on the unemployment benefits, but a lot of people in Lawrence had to work. So we became the 3rd per capita in infections in the Commonwealth. And so it was a place that if you were going to pick a place to get it, we were in the top 3. So we think about, how do we go back after all this? What does work look like? We need to figure that piece out, how we interact with each other with equity. One of the things that I didn't say earlier, one of the things that we're most proud of for us, we're a majority police department. 18 of the 25 department heads in our community are people of color or women. And so the cities have to figure this piece out and do it. And again, what's really surprising is that we were able to pivot very fast. Stay home. Everybody stayed home. Stay off the highways. Get food to people. All these things that COVID forced us to do. So next time when somebody says, hey, we have a big idea, and everybody says, well, I don't know if we can do that big thing. Well, you just have to remind them, we just all spent 6 months at home on the call, and we all kind of think about the outside seating. And I know it looks great if you ever see pictures of it in Boston. We're trying to emulate all that wonderful outside seating, eating. And it feels that way in Lawrence. All we did was take away a couple of parking spaces, put up some Jersey barriers. They've been decorating the Jersey barriers, and we've been innovative about it. So I think that's the piece of it. How do we, for us, we have some, commercial space that's not going to get refilled because people are just going to work from home. How about we make those spaces housing? That way we can bring the price of rent down. And create a better, lived environment here. So I think it's very exciting. There's a lot of hope. I mean, I'm afraid of the second wave, mostly because we're not done with the first wave yet. So that's a big fear, but there's hope at the end of it that the new cities are going to be great places.
I'm loving these themes about innovation, about the collaboration across cities. I can already see where we're going with some of the calls to action here. Town Manager Bartha, tell us about looking forward in Danvers. What are some of those lessons? What are the things that you're thinking about? And then I'd love to think about us pivoting, Mr. Drayson, on data, really thinking across the region, especially with this audience of researchers, data scientists, et cetera. What are some of those issues? How might they be thinking about how to engage in these issues? Mr. Bartha?
Thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, Danvers, I could echo everything that's already been said. We faced a lot of the same issues on a bit smaller scale than our city counterparts. But collaboration, has been really uplifting. One of the things we've been challenging our, managers and leadership team to do is sort of be taking notes right now about the changes we've had to make the past 5 months that are actually working better than, what we were doing before, because I think there's going to be a real opportunity for reimagining the way that we do a lot of things. Mark alluded to that with, what sort of long-term implications is this going to have on traffic patterns, commuting, and secondarily, if there's, open commercial space that's opening up, as Mayor Rivera just said, is that changing housing development patterns, putting extra need on, cheap high-speed internet for companies that are investing in, staying home and not getting into the city, and what the implications are for Boston. So, on a positive note, those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about in terms of, regulatory processes. We had our board delegate quite a bit of authority to staff back in June to make sure that we could approve modifications to license holders for restaurants, small businesses, so that, things that used to have to be posted for a public hearing and wait 2 weeks and come on a Tuesday night at 7 p.m. to make your case. Now staff can review this stuff and in 48 hours get a yes back. And that's really, given some flexibility to our business community, most of whom are suffering, dearly right now. One of the things, and I think data is going to be the sort of the theme that ties this together in terms of what we need. But when I think about sort of what's keeping me up, will our business community survive a second wave financially, and our residents? And what are the implications of a second wave for us as an organization when 75 cents of every dollar we spend is on the people providing services? What happens then if that second wave cripples our economy a second time? And I think the piece looking forward that's most of interest to me is, and I think where the public health crisis and the racial inequity merge is, we have 9% of our community that identifies as non-white. How are they faring right now? We recognize they were underrepresented, underrepresented before COVID. We know from the data that they're suffering disproportionately during COVID. And this third area is an area that, we've decided to tackle both as an organization and in partnership with our Human Rights and Inclusion Committee. We view this as an opportunity to sort of lean into that conversation to make a good community better. But as if I have time, we'll talk a little bit about data is presenting itself as an early obstacle in that effort. So I would, in the interest of time, I'll stop there so that we can get to the roundtable part.
Yeah, let's get to, and we have questions from the audience as well. We want to pivot to those. Obviously, for Microsoft, we are working with cities all around the world and have been for years related to data and technology. We're seeing more innovation now, more partnership, taking on different issues, just coming at that engagement in a very different way. And Mr. Drayson, I'd love to hear from you as you look sort of at the broad Boston region. What are some of those issues that data can provide some of the breakthroughs on? What should we all be thinking about? Sir, you're on mute.
Every time I hope I'm going to remember to unmute, and I never do. One of the issues we face with data is that we've seen a lot of services in our society become more private, more privately held, and sometimes operated without, well, I think they're employees, but with private contractors, people that are called private contractors, even though I think they look, smell, and feel like employees, in my opinion. But we are trying to make sure that those sources of data are available for policymaking. One of the things that MAPC has been working very hard on is to get the necessary data from the transportation network companies, from the Ubers and the Lyfts. It's to get the necessary data from Airbnb. It's to provide resources to our communities, to our individual municipalities, so they can collect and analyze data, which again, there are a few municipalities who do a very good job at that, large and small, but there are many that just don't have the resources to do that. Data can inform all of our public policy debates and all of our public policy discussions, as long as it is open and democratically available. Honestly, one of the issues we faced early on in COVID with the testing information was there wasn't enough of it. It wasn't being gathered in a routine manner. It wasn't being made available by municipality, and it wasn't all being made public. And we've gotten a lot better about that, but we haven't come all the way that we need to. And that is especially true now at this very interesting and difficult inflection point when things have gotten a lot better, and they still look better here in Massachusetts, but they're getting a lot worse in the rest of the country. And folks are saying, well, we're going to make our judgments based on data. Well, knowing what that data is and making sure it isn't cherry picked and making sure it's available to everyone so that it can be criticized, honestly, criticized in the press, criticized by researchers, is terribly, terribly important. Because if we're making life and death decisions on that data, everybody has to know what it is, and it has to be open to interpretation and discussion.
Thank you. I want to shift. We
Can I
only
just say something about that?
Yes, please.
What's important is, and if it wasn't for these, at least for communities of colors, if it wasn't for places like the Trotter Institute at UMass Boston and the Vestone Institute at UMass Boston, and all these university institutes that specifically deal with the need for that data and how it impacts communities of color, we would be basically at ground zero. And so another call to action is to support these places that are gonna drill down to the information that Mark was talking about.
Great. I'm recognizing we only have a few minutes left. Frankly, there's so much to dive into and so much that I would love to talk to you about. I want to turn to a question that came in from the audience, thanking you all for sharing perspectives and experiences today. The questions, moving forward, how do you envision continuing this collaborative spirit among different cities and officials that developed because of the pandemic? Mayor Walsh, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think that one thing that people didn't understand or recognize that a lot of the collaboration between mayors has always existed. We work and share best practices. We have a pretty tight-knit community here in Massachusetts. Danny Rivera and Yvonne, this is not the first time we've been on panels together. It's not the first time we've collaborated together. And I think that we support each other and we help each other out. I think COVID has kind of put that, taken that to a new level. But we're all three of us are affiliated also with the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And the U.S. Conference of Mayors is a network of mayors from around America, from cities like New York and Los Angeles, Chicago, Boston, to smaller cities around America. And that's another place where we really lean on each other and share ideas and best practices. One example of that, in the very beginning of COVID, Jenny Durkin, the mayor of Seattle, in the very beginning, if everyone remembers, Seattle was the epicenter of the COVID crisis. And Jenny called me, and Mayor Durkin, I should say, called me and told me what to expect. And she gave us a little bit of an understanding, heads up actually, on nursing homes, what was happening in Seattle. And if you look in Boston, a lot of our deaths in Massachusetts happen in nursing home, but in the city of Boston, deaths happen there as well. But we're able to get in there because the nursing homes are run by the state. But in Boston, we got in there and provided PPE to the nursing homes and provided additional staff there. So I think moving forward, really, really collaborating on a whole host of issues are really important. One other quick example, talking about, clearly I'm a white guy, as you can see. And when you talk about racism and race, I can't see through the same eyes as Yvonne Spicer, but I can call Yvonne Spicer and ask her for her ideas and input on how to help in a situation on how to address race, and the same for Danny in his community, and they with me. So I think that it's always been a tight-knit understanding, but I think even more so moving forward, because the challenges of what we're facing, racial unrest, economic challenges, reopening challenges, these are all challenges that all of our cities, Danvers and Lawrence and Framingham, we go through these on a daily basis.
I know that we're about to get the hook here, and I want to give everybody a chance to just, with a lightning round, give us something as for this audience that you would love for them to be thinking about, engaging in, especially if there's something related to a policy issue or technology or data that could really play a role post-COVID. What's that hope? What would you love for people to engage in? And Town Manager Bartha, we'll start with you.
Thanks. So I would quickly, first of all, I love Dan's concept of using this platform as a call to action, because as you mentioned, there's a lot of brain power tuned in right now. And I want to make the case that towns like Danvers are sort of the forgotten sweet spot for collaboration and experimentation with the research community. We're big enough to have staff in key places that can work with data and dissect data and use it. but we're not big enough to dedicate those resources, solely to those projects. And just real quickly, 2 examples of where we'd love to sort of harness the horsepower. We just rezoned 75 acres of our downtown this spring as smart growth, nod to Mark, overwhelmingly supported by our town meeting. It's going to increase density. It's going to increase affordability. It's going to require developers to invest in our open space. But on an earlier panel of this conference, I heard some researchers describing the parcel level work they were doing in Boston, layering in, half a dozen or more variables. And I thought, whoa, how much better could our zoning have been if we had access to that kind of analytic work to underpin the work we're doing? And we work all the time with MAPC, and they're great partners in that work. But there are things that the folks at MIT and elsewhere are doing that, towns like Danvers, your work can be implemented and make an impact. We've already seen 150 housing units either developed or in the pipeline, which is not a big number in Boston terms, but that represents 1.5% of our total housing count in town. So it is a big deal. And then I already mentioned with equity and diversity, we know where we want to go. We know the conversations we need to have, but we understand that data is going to help frame a lot of those discussions. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great. Mayor Spicer, and we're really doing lightning round, so you got to make them quick.
I'm going to say what we need to really focus on is infrastructure, Wi-Fi connectivity in our communities to allow people to work from home, for schools to be able to operate more effectively. And moreover, it should be free.
Mayor Rivera.
The one tech one is if you can talk to DPH about a new Maven system. If you don't know what the Maven is, it's the database that goes after the epidemiology. It tracks all the sick people. I don't know how to say that word. And so we need a new database for the state. So please get in there and figure out if we can get some one of those people, all the coders go after it and try to make it better. And 2 easy ones. Run for public office at the local level because it's the most important part of your life. And support housing in your communities. All you 84 people watching, support housing in your communities.
Mayor Walsh.
I got to make sure I'm not on mute. I think that the one thing I'd say to everyone is that we have to address challenges that we've been dealing with from the pandemic and longstanding disparities in our society. We must create a new and better normal, one that's inclusive, that lifts everyone up. And don't sit on the sidelines. Don't stay on the sidelines. Get involved.
Mr. Drayson, you are going to get the last word. To call to action, what would you recommend?
I don't often get the last word. I'm not sure I deserve it, but I'm going to build on Dan's comment about housing. I'm actually a housing planner. That's what I spend a lot of my time doing and thinking about. It's kind of what's in my heart. And we still have a very segregated region around the country. People talk about that as being a Boston problem. That is not a Boston problem. It is a greater Boston problem. We have a desperate need to have different kinds of people living with each other, to have different races and ethnic groups living with each other and understanding each other. And people usually live in houses, not all the time, but usually. And unless we build more housing and find ways to build more housing that is available and affordable to everybody everywhere in the region, then a lot of the problems that we've seen during COVID and a lot of the problems that we see in regard to the relationships between law enforcement and the communities of color, those are problems that we're going to continue to see because we are not living with each other.
I want to personally thank each of you for taking the time today. We know how busy you are and all of the work that has been taking place for years, and in particular in these last 5 months. We thank you for that work as well, keeping our community so strong. It is, it may seem like you're just kind of going day to day and common sense. For people outside of the system, it can sometimes seem so cloudy. We don't know what's really happening in cities and how it's all working. So to enlighten us today really was incredible, an incredible opportunity for everybody on the phone. I want to thank Bari again for organizing this panel and the whole conference, and turn it back over to Dan to close us out.
All right. Well, thank you all. Thank you so much. Mayors Walsh, Spicer, Rivera, Town Manager Bartha, Mark, and of course Sid for leading us through this conversation. I think this was really the perfect closing to this conference. And to the attendees, thank you for joining us. I want to note that we discovered very early on there was a technical issue with getting the link out. So thank you to those who were able to join late. But this will live in perpetuity as we are releasing as a podcast next week. And with that, we have arrived at the conclusion of, in my estimation, what was the longest one-day conference in history. And so we're here. And so all kidding aside, it's been 15 weeks, 11 topical panels covering everything from transportation to housing to pollution to climate, 3 keynote panels, almost exactly 70 speakers. And we crunched some numbers last night. We have to be more rigorous about it, but it seems we have at least 550 to 575 total attendees, and never fewer than 50 in any panel. So this is quite the conference. And when I look back to early March, when we got started reimagining this, or even to September when we started planning this conference in the first place, it would be really hard to say I or anyone else could have pictured this particular moment and the pathway that brought us here. So there are a lot of lessons here. I want to share a few, hopefully succinct ones to kind of close out the conference, if everyone will sort of humor me on that. But first, I do need to remind everyone about the reception following this. For those who can join us, bit.ly/BariHappy with the password capital BARI. And I also need to thank a few people. I did this at the opening, and I'm going to do it again now at the closing. So first, I want to thank all of you, the broader Bari community, the attendees, the speakers from every panel, those who asked questions and engaged directly in this ongoing conversation. Without this community, we don't have panels, we don't have a conference, we have nothing. So that's first and foremost. Next, I just want to go through our sponsors, the Boston Indicators Project at the Boston Foundation, the Barr Foundation, the Northeastern University School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs, the Harvard Graduate School of Education, the Initiative on Cities at Boston University, the Heller School for Social Policy and Management at Brandeis University, and datadiversitykids.org, the Institute for Quantitative Social Science at Harvard University, the Harvard Data Science Initiative, MIT Connection Science, Microsoft New England, Sasaki, and our studio all contributed to helping put this together, and we thank them very much. Other partners included Boston's Mayor's Office of Neuromechanics and the City of Boston Analytics team, the Sasaki Foundation, Code for Boston, the Engagement Lab at Emerson College, the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub, and the Metro Lab Network, all of whom worked closely with us in designing and thinking through the conference and getting the word out to all of you. And almost last, I want to note the conference committee by name, because normally they would be on the back page of a conference program. We don't have a conference program, and so you can't go look at the back page. So I do need to give credit to these people, because these people committed their time to imagine what the conference would be, to review proposals, and to work with us to execute on everything that you've seen over the last 15 weeks. And that includes Amy Sprung from Microsoft, Eric Gordon from Emerson College, Esteban Moro from MIT, Catherine Lusk from Boston University, Kim Lucas, formerly of the city's data analytics team, but now of the Metro Lab Network, Elizabeth Hess of the Institute for Quantitative Social Science, Luke Schuster from Boston Indicators, Ted Landsmark from the Dukakis Center for Urban and Regional Policy at Northeastern, Tim Reardon from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and Elizabeth Langdon Gray from the Harvard Data Science Initiative. And then I'm almost done with my thank yous, I promise. I need to thank Jenny Stevens, who is the director of the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs at Northeastern University, and has been very generous with the support of our center being there, and her team working with us on this and other efforts. And then finally, to the Bari team, right? You guys all get to see me every week, but there's a full team behind this, as speakers regularly referred to Will Pfeffer, the initial executive producer of the conference, and now at Code for America as the brigade liaison for cities up and down the East Coast. And then to Alina Risti, Riley Tucker, and Sage Gibbons, as well as Ryan Gosser of the School of Public Policy, who were all involved throughout. But then when Will left, they really stepped up, and a lot of people noted that it was a seamless transition, and it felt that way on my end as well. Just a fantastic team. And then to David Braid, Bari's new program coordinator, who has been a champ in stepping up midstream, taking over the operation. So I kind of should have anticipated, like months ago, we needed a laugh track or a clap track. We don't have that, unfortunately, but they deserve everyone's major round of applause. So with that, I want to conclude with lessons for today and lessons for the conference. And then I want us all to have a beer or wine, if that's your choice. So I see three main themes, and I may be cribbing a bit from the title of the conference, but I think that's important anyway. So the first one is co-creation. We've seen dozens of talks and perspectives on how researchers, policymakers, nonprofits, foundations, community organizations, and members all work together to identify problems and questions of interest, to gather and generate data, and to explore solutions. Second is equity. This was an original goal of the conference, to capture how all of these many panels illuminate the disparate experiences of different groups of Bostonians, but really residents of all of greater Boston, by race, by socioeconomic status, by geography. But the death of George Floyd in the middle of the conference and the ensuing public conversation really catapulted racial equity into the national limelight, and in so doing placed the same topic in stark relief in every week of the conference since then. And then third is the theme we were not anticipating last fall when we started planning the conference. It's COVID-19 and the pervasive, persistent disruption that is a pandemic. We started the conference at a moment when most of the public discussion was about infection and transmission, but we chose in that opening keynote to call out the impacts to our other systems, the labor market, primary and secondary education, housing, mental health and social services, right? And charting the challenges ahead and trying to propose solutions and where we go next. And then we bookended that theme today, 3 months later, with what sounded to me like no less than a call to action for this community, right? These are the things we need to start working on now. And I love the lightning round question. And in a sense, it was the shortest part of the conversation, right? But in a sense, it was the most direct. This is what we need to do, right? And this is how we help municipalities to move forward. And that should be our focus for the next year and beyond. These are the projects we look forward to seeing at the conference next year. And to that point, we'll send out more about this next week, but Bari has spent the last 3 months behind the scenes. We've been developing a COVID in Boston and in some cases greater Boston database that is drawing from administrative records, social media feeds, internet platforms, so on and so forth, to try to track what happened before, during, and after, well, partially after, we're not really after, the pandemic. And that's going to be a really valuable public resource for research and teaching that we hope can drive a lot of work in the next year. So in closing, our three themes come together, right? The other day I was talking to Eric Gordon, who I mentioned earlier, and he said, I hear everyone saying build back better, but better for whom? Building back better doesn't just happen. Right? Innovation is not value neutral. It has to be driven by the kind of society we in fact want. This is an opportunity and we shouldn't miss it, right? So then for whom? I say personally, and I'm not elected, but I at least have a platform right now to say this, we should do so with a laser-like focus on equity and justice, echoing the points that the town manager, Mark, just made. And additionally, if we commit to building back better, we need to know how we do so. And again, I would argue we do so through co-creation. We do so through an interweaving of the diverse voices and expertise present in our region. And anything less than that is just an incomplete execution of our goals. So this is that call to action for researchers, public officials, practitioners, nonprofits, foundations, community organizations, and members to commit themselves to the collaborative effort to build back better and strive together for the society we want. And with that, we're done. Thank you for joining us all these 15 weeks, for those who did, and for one panel, if that's all you were able to join for. Please enjoy everything we've put on the internet through the YouTube, through the podcasts. And in the meantime, we will flip over to the happy hour in a moment, bit.ly/BariHappy, password capital BARI, and I look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you again to our panel, and have a great weekend, everyone.